Do-hyun Kim stared at his computer screen in the dimly lit editing room. Something was wrong with the footage, but he couldn't explain what. As the lead cinematographer for the new remake of The Omen, he had reviewed thousands of shots in his career. But these were different. He played the church scene again. The lighting was perfect. The actors hit their marks. But there was something else. A shadow moved in the background behind the altar. That wasn't possible. They had carefully controlled all the lighting. "You're still here." Hae-Nul Park, the director, walked in with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Do-hyun. "It's past midnight." "Look at this," Do-hyun said, pointing at the screen. "Watch the back of the church." Hae-Nul leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The scene played again. The actor walking down the aisle, the candles flickering, and there, the shadow that shouldn't exist. "Could be a light malfunction," Hae-Nul said, but his voice wasn't confident. "Or maybe someone from the crew walked past." Do-hyun shook his head. "I checked the call sheet. Nobody was supposed to be there. And look at how it moves. It's not natural." He pulled up another clip from yesterday's shoot. This time, it was a scene in the old library. The cameras had been acting strange all day, turning on and off by themselves. In the footage, books fell from shelves with no one touching them. The crew had thought it was the old building settling, but now Do-hyun wasn't so sure. "Equipment problems happen all the time," Hae-Nul said, but he kept watching. "Remember last week? 3 lights exploded during the basement scene." "That's my point," Do-hyun said. He opened a folder on his computer. "I've been keeping track. In the past month, we've had 27 equipment malfunctions, all during important scenes. The cameras break down exactly when we're filming crucial moments from the original movie." Hae-Nul sat down heavily in the spare chair. "What are you saying?" "I don't know yet." Do-hyun played another clip. This time, the actor's face changed for a split second, became something else, before returning to normal. "But I think we need to be careful. Very careful." The computer screen flickered. Do-hyun quickly saved his work. He had learned to back up everything twice after losing several hours of footage last week. The lights in the editing room dimmed, then brightened again. "Just old wiring," Hae-Nul said, but he stood up quickly. "We'll have maintenance check it tomorrow." Do-hyun wasn't listening. He had noticed something new in the footage, a pattern in the static, like symbols or letters. He zoomed in, trying to make them clear. The door to the editing room slammed shut. Both men jumped. Hae-Nul laughed nervously. "Wind from the air conditioning." "There is no air conditioning in this building," Do-hyun said quietly. "It's too old." They looked at each other. On the screen, the symbols became clearer for a moment. They looked ancient, like something that might be carved into temple walls. Then the computer shut off completely. Do-hyun reached for the power button, but stopped. In the black screen's reflection, he saw something move behind them. A shadow, darker than the darkness of the room. "Hae-Nul," he said calmly, "I think we should leave. Now." They walked quickly to the door. It wouldn't open. Hae-Nul pulled harder, then kicked it. Nothing. The temperature in the room dropped. Their breath came out in white clouds. Do-hyun's coffee cup cracked, dark liquid spreading across his desk like blood. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The door clicked open by itself. The lights came back on. The computer rebooted as if nothing had happened. Hae-Nul grabbed his jacket. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "we're going to have a very long talk about this. Very long." Do-hyun nodded, but he wasn't thinking about tomorrow. He was thinking about the symbols he'd seen, and about the next scene they were supposed to film, the one where the original movie's crew had reported the strangest accidents. As they left, he copied all his files onto a portable drive. He had a feeling he would need proof of what he'd seen. Behind him, in the empty editing room, the computer screen flickered one last time. In the static for just a moment, a face appeared. It was smiling. Mae Ray Song checked her watch again. 3:15 p.m. She had been organizing props in the old church for tomorrow's shoot since 1:00 p.m., but something felt wrong. The sunlight through the stained glass windows suggested early morning, not mid-afternoon. She pulled out her phone to confirm the time. The screen was black. Dead battery. Impossible. She had charged it fully before starting work. Mayray looked around the church. The props were in different places than she remembered putting them. The crosses she had carefully arranged on the altar were now hanging on the walls. "Hello," she called out. Her voice echoed strangely. "Is anyone here?" No answer, just the sound of wood creaking and candles flickering. Candles she was certain she hadn't lit. Mayray walked to the altar. She needed to fix the crosses before the director arrived. As she reached for the first one, she noticed markings on its surface. They looked fresh, as if someone had just carved them. The symbols were similar to the ones Do-hyun had shown her from his footage yesterday. A cold breeze brushed her neck. Mayray turned quickly, but the church doors were closed. All the windows were shut. She took out her notebook, the one where she kept track of prop positions, and started sketching the symbols. They seemed to shift under her gaze, changing shape slightly each time she looked away. The candles went out all at once. In the sudden darkness, Mayray heard footsteps in the balcony above. Heavy steps, moving slowly across old wooden boards. She should run, she knew that. But something kept her in place, watching the darkness above. "Who's there?" She called again. The footsteps stopped. Then she saw it, a figure leaning over the balcony rail. It was dark, darker than the shadows around it. It had no clear shape, like smoke that had decided to pretend to be human. Mayray's notebook fell from her shaking hands. The sound echoed through the church like a gunshot. The figure turned its head, or what might have been its head, toward her. Time seemed to stop. Mayray felt a pressure in her mind, like something was trying to speak to her without words. Images flashed through her thoughts. The original movie set from 1976, accidents that hadn't happened yet, warnings written in languages she didn't know but somehow understood. The pressure built until she thought her head would burst. Then, suddenly, everything went white. When Mayray opened her eyes, she was sitting in the front pew. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Afternoon light now. Her phone lay beside her, working perfectly. It showed 3:45 p.m. The crosses were back on the altar. No symbols marked their surfaces. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for her notebook. She found it on the floor where she had dropped it. The symbols she had drawn were still there, but they had changed. They now formed words in clear Korean. "Time is short. The gate opens soon." Mayray gathered her things quickly. She needed to find Do-hyun, show him what had happened. But as she reached the church door, she stopped. Something was different. She could feel it in her mind, like a new sense had awakened. She turned back to look at the church interior one last time. Now she could see what she had missed before. Thin lines of energy running through the walls, connecting certain points in complex patterns. And she knew, somehow, that these patterns were important. Her phone buzzed. A text from the director. Emergency meeting in 15 minutes. Accident on set B. Mayray looked at her notebook again. Below the Korean words, new symbols were appearing by themselves, writing a warning she could suddenly understand. "It has chosen you to see. Now you must help stop what comes next." She took a deep breath and walked out of the church. The door closed behind her with a sound like a sigh. In her mind, she could feel danger approaching, not just for her, but for everyone involved in the film. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the ground. Mayray noticed that her shadow wasn't quite the right shape anymore, and it sometimes moved a second too late. Jae-won Lee sat in his security office, surrounded by screens showing every corner of the movie set. As head of security, he had seen many strange things in his 15 years of work. But nothing like this. He rewound the footage from camera 4 again. At exactly 3:33 p.m., The heavy lighting rig above Stage B had fallen. No one was hurt. The actors had left for a break just 2 minutes before. The strange part was how it fell. The cables hadn't snapped. They had unraveled themselves, like snakes letting go. G1 had watched it happen on 3 different cameras. No one could have done this. He opened his incident log on the computer. In the past week alone, there had been 12 serious accidents. 3 fires started in empty rooms. 4 cameras broke during crucial scenes. 2 actors had identical nightmares and couldn't wake up. The church doors had locked themselves, trapping people inside. All the crosses in storage had turned upside down overnight. The new lighting rig had fallen today. Jae-won pulled out the original movie script that Do-hyun had given him. He started matching the accidents to scenes they were supposed to film. A pattern emerged that made his hands shake. Each accident happened exactly 1 day before they were scheduled to film a scene where something similar had happened in the original 1976 movie. It was like history was repeating itself, but giving warnings first. His phone rang, making him jump. It was Mireille. Jae-won, she said, her voice trembling. Check camera 7 in the church. Now. He switched to the church feed. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then he noticed the shadows. They were moving against the light, gathering in corners where shadows shouldn't exist. I can feel them now, Mireille said quietly. After what happened yesterday, they're getting stronger. Stay where you are, Jae-won told her. I'm coming to. The power went out. All screens went black. Emergency lights cast a red glow through the office. Jae-won reached for his flashlight, but stopped. In the red light, he could see his breath. The temperature had dropped so fast that frost was forming on his coffee cup. His security tablet lit up by itself. Words appeared on the screen, typing themselves. Check the original crew list. Find the ones who survived. Ask about the ritual. The tablet began showing images, newspaper clippings from 1976, accident reports, hospital records. They flashed by too fast to read, but one word kept appearing. Gateway. The lights came back on suddenly. Ji-won's phone buzzed with messages about the power failure, but he wasn't looking at his phone. He was staring at his incident log. While the power was out, something had added to his list. Under each accident, new words had appeared, written in an ancient-looking script, and below everything, in clear Korean. The pattern is the key. The accidents are the lock. What opens when all keys turn. Jae-won printed everything quickly. He needed to show this to Do-hyun and Mireille. As pages came out of the printer, he noticed something else. Every accident had happened at 3:33, whether AM or PM. He checked his watch. 3:32 p.m. The printer stopped. The paper was stuck. Jae-won reached in to pull it out, then froze. On the last page, new words were appearing. Don't look behind you. Run. He ran. Behind him, at exactly 3:33 p.m., his office burst into flames. Through the fire, he saw a figure standing, watching. It raised a hand, and all the security cameras exploded at once. Jae-won didn't stop running until he reached the main stage. Do-hyun was there, looking at his own notes. Their eyes met, and Jae-won knew they had both figured out the same thing. The original movie, Do-hyun said, wasn't just a film. No, Jae-won agreed, still catching his breath. It was a ritual. And we're doing it again. Yoon-hee Choi walked through the dim basement of the National Film Archive, her footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. As the lead researcher for the Omen remake, she had spent weeks requesting access to these sealed records. Now she understood why they had been so difficult to obtain. The archive room was filled with boxes from the original 1976 production. She opened the first one, labeled Production Notes. Restricted access. Inside, she found handwritten journals from the original crew members. The pages were yellowed, but the warnings they contained were clear. Something follows us. One grip had written, It moves through the cameras. It watches us through the lens. Yoon-hee checked her phone's recording app and began to speak. Archive examination, day 1. The original production documentation shows multiple accounts of supernatural events, all following the same pattern we're seeing now. She moved to another box. This one held old photographs, hundreds of them. Many showed strange shadows or blurred figures in the background. Behind each photo, someone had written the same message: "Do not remake this film." The lights flickered. Yoon-hee took a deep breath and continued her work. She found a sealed envelope marked "Director's Final Statement." Inside was a letter, dated 1 week after the original film's completion. "We didn't make a movie," the director had written. "We performed a ritual without knowing it. Each scene was a key, each accident a sign. We opened something. It's still open." Her phone rang, making her jump. It was Do-hyun. "Did you find anything?" he asked. "Yes," Yoon-hee said, looking through more papers. "The original crew knew something was wrong. They tried to warn future filmmakers. There's a pattern to all of this." She found a map of the original filming locations. Red marks showed where accidents had happened. When she overlaid it with their current filming schedule, the marks matched perfectly. "Listen to this," she told Do-hyun. "One of the original actors wrote that during the church scene, he saw something in the mirror. Not his reflection, but a doorway. Something was trying to come through." The line went silent for a moment. Then Do-hyun spoke quietly. "We're filming the church scene tomorrow." Yoon-hee's hand shook as she opened another file. This one contained medical records. Several crew members had reported the same symptoms: lost time, strange visions, and the ability to see things others couldn't. Just like Myrae was experiencing now. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, Yoon-hee heard papers rustling. Not from her hands, from across the room. Someone, or something, was moving through the archives. She turned on her phone's flashlight. The beam caught something moving between the shelves. It looked like a person made of shadows, carrying an old film reel. "Hello," she called out, her voice steady despite her fear. The figure turned. Where its face should be, there was only static, like an old TV screen. It held out the film reel. Yoon-hee took a step forward. The temperature dropped sharply. Her phone's light began to flicker, but she kept walking. She needed to know. The figure placed the reel on a shelf and vanished. When Yoon-hee reached the shelf, she found not just the reel, but a notebook she hadn't seen before. Its pages contained detailed instructions, written in multiple languages. To close what was opened, the first page read, "The ritual must be completed correctly, or everything ends." The lights came back on. Yoon-hee quickly packed the notebook and film reel into her bag. As she turned to leave, she noticed one last thing. All the boxes in the archive had rearranged themselves to form a symbol on the floor, the same symbol that had appeared in Do-hyun's footage. Her phone buzzed with a text from Myrae. "Something's happening at the church. Come quickly. And bring whatever you found. Time is running out." Tae-woo Kang stood in the center of the church set, ready to film the most important scene of the Omen remake. As the lead actor, he had performed many challenging roles, but something felt different today. The air seemed heavier, and the shadows in the corners of the church moved in ways that shadows shouldn't. Director Hae-nul Park called for quiet on the set. The cameras began rolling. Tae-woo started his lines, walking toward the altar as rehearsed. Then everything changed. A cold sensation washed over him, like stepping into icy water. His vision blurred, then cleared, but what he saw wasn't the church set anymore. He saw a vast darkness filled with moving shapes and distant lights that might have been stars, or might have been eyes. The crew watched in amazement as Tae-woo's performance transformed. His voice changed, becoming deeper and older. His movements became fluid and strange, like someone who had never worn a human body before. The cameras captured everything, their digital displays showing strange symbols between the frames. "Keep rolling," Haenul whispered, even though something told him they should stop. Taiwu reached the altar. The candles around him flickered wildly, though there was no wind. He turned to face the cameras, but his eyes were different now. They reflected light like a cat's eyes, glowing in the darkness. Do-hyun, watching through the main camera, saw something else in the lens. A shape stood behind Ha-woo, tall and dark, moving in perfect sync with the actor. Every gesture, every step was mirrored by this shadow being. Mireille, standing near the church doors, could see energy swirling around Ta-woo like a storm. Her new ability showed her what others couldn't see. The barrier between worlds was getting thinner with every word he spoke. Cut. Haenul finally called out. But Ta-woo didn't stop. He continued speaking, but not in Korean or English. The words he spoke were ancient and wrong, making the air itself vibrate. The crosses on the walls began to turn slowly, spinning like compass needles, searching for north. Jae-won checked his watch. 3:33 p.m. Of course it was. Yoon, he burst through the church doors, holding the notebook she had found in the archive. Stop him, she shouted. He's completing the ritual. But it was too late. Ta-woo raised his hands, and all the cameras turned to face him at once, their lenses glowing with an inner light. Through each screen, something could be seen moving, trying to push through into our world. The lights exploded, plunging the church into darkness. When the emergency lights came on, Ta-woo lay unconscious on the floor. The cameras had stopped recording, but their memory cards were completely filled. Later, in the editing room, they watched the footage. Ta-woo's performance was perfect, haunting, and completely impossible. His movements defied physics. His voice contained sounds humans couldn't make. And behind him, visible in every frame, the shadow being grew clearer and clearer. Ta-woo himself remembered nothing. I just followed the script, he said, looking pale and tired. Did we get the scene? But the script on his dressing room table had changed. The pages were filled with those same ancient symbols, and the final scene now described something very different, a ritual that would open a gateway between worlds. In the footage, paused on the editing screen, the shadow being seemed to look directly at them. Its face was becoming clearer with each viewing. Soon, they all knew, it would be clear enough to step through the screen entirely. Mireille touched the screen gently. It's not trying to come through the gateway, she said, her voice shaking. It's telling us that something else is already here. Sun Le-cho sat alone in her office, surrounded by script pages covered in strange symbols. As script supervisor, she had memorized every word of the Omen remake. Now those words were changing before her eyes, transforming into something ancient and frightening. She picked up the original screenplay again. The symbols had appeared first in the margins, then between the lines, and now they were replacing the actual text. But Sunmai noticed something strange. The symbols followed a pattern, repeating every 13th line. Her computer chimed. An email from Yoon-hee contained scanned pages from the archive. Sunmai opened them and gasped. The symbols in the old documents matched the ones appearing in her script exactly. The phone rang. It was Mireille. The shadows are getting worse, she said without greeting. They're following people now. Have you found anything in the script? Yes, Sunmai replied, laying out the pages in order. The symbols aren't random. They're telling a story, a prophecy about a gateway between worlds. Each scene we film is like turning a key. She heard Mireille take a sharp breath. Can you decode it? Sunmai looked at her notes. The original movie wasn't just a film. It was designed to open something. Each major scene matches an ancient ritual. The accidents, the strange events, they're all part of the pattern. Her office lights flickered. The temperature dropped suddenly. On her computer screen, words began typing themselves. Tell them what comes next. Sunmai's hands shook as she read from her translation. The gateway opens in 3 stages. First, the signs, accidents, and visions. Second, the vessel, an actor possessed by what waits on the other side. We've already seen both of these. And the third? Mireille asked quietly. The merging. Sun may read. When the barrier breaks completely, it happens when. She stopped, staring at the next line in horror. When what? When we film the final scene. The one we're scheduled to shoot tomorrow. The lights went out completely. In the darkness, Sunmay's computer screen glowed brighter. The symbols on the script pages began to shine with a faint blue light, moving across the paper like living things. She heard footsteps in the hallway outside her office. They were wrong somehow. Too heavy, too slow. The doorknob turned slowly. Sunmay grabbed her phone and translation notes, then slid under her desk. The door opened. Something entered the room, bringing a smell like old film and burning plastic. Through a gap between the desk and floor, she saw its feet, or what looked like feet. They were made of shifting shadows and static, like a TV channel with bad reception. Her phone vibrated silently. A text from Do-hyun. Don't move. We're coming. The thing moved around her office, touching the script pages. Where its fingers passed, the paper turned black and crumbled. It was destroying the evidence. Sun-mi covered her mouth to stay quiet. On her laptop screen, she saw new words forming. The prophecy must be fulfilled. The gateway must open. What was bound will be unbound. Suddenly, the fire alarm sounded. Water sprayed from the sprinklers. The shadow being hissed like static and disappeared. Minutes later, Do-hyun and Ji-won rushed in. Are you okay? Ji-won asked, helping her up. Sun-mi held up her translation notes, somehow still dry. We have to stop tomorrow's shoot, she said. If we film that final scene, we'll complete the ritual. And then nothing will be able to close the gateway again. Hyun-woo Nam stared at the production budget spreadsheet on his computer screen. As the producer of the Omen remake, he had invested millions in this project. Now, at 2:00 a.m. in his office, he had to make an impossible decision. The phone on his desk showed missed calls from everyone. The studio executives, the investors, and the insurance company. None of them would believe the truth. How could he explain that continuing the film would open a gateway to something ancient and dangerous? His office door opened. Hae-nul Park walked in, followed by Do-hyun, Mireille, and the others. They all looked tired and afraid. 3 crew members have disappeared, Ji-won reported, placing his security logs on the desk. They vanished during their shifts. All we found were those symbols, burned into the walls where they were last seen. Hyun-woo picked up Sun-mi's translation of the prophecy. If we cancel the production, we lose everything. The studio will never work with us again. But if we continue, we might lose more than money. Mireille finished. She pointed to the window. Outside, the streetlights were flickering in a pattern. The shadows between them moved like living things. The computer screen changed by itself, showing footage from yesterday's shoot. In every frame, the shadow beings were clearer now. They weren't hiding anymore. The gateway is already partly open, Yoon-hee explained, showing pages from the archive. The original film started it. Our remake is finishing what they began. Tai-woo, who had been quiet since his possession, spoke up. I remember things now, he said softly. When it was inside me, I saw what it wants. It's been waiting for so long, using films as doorways. Each version of the Omen made the door wider. The lights in the office dimmed. On Hyun-woo's desk, papers began to move by themselves, forming those same ancient symbols. His computer showed a new message. Complete the ritual. Free us. We have 12 hours until the final scene, Hae-nul said. Once we start filming, we can't stop. The choice has to be made now. Hyun-woo stood and walked to the window. The city looked different now. Mireille had taught them all to see what she could see, the lines of energy running through everything, growing stronger as the gateway opened wider. His phone rang again. The studio wanted an answer. They had promised to release the film in 3 months. Millions of dollars, countless careers, all hanging on his decision. A shadow moved across the wall, forming words, "You cannot stop what was started ages ago." "Actually," Hyunwoo said slowly, "I think we can." He turned to face his team. "We're not just making a film. We're completing a ritual that's been waiting for decades. That means we can change the ending." The shadow beings didn't like that. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Papers flew off the desk. The computer screen cracked. But Hyunwoo had made his choice. "Call everyone," he ordered. "We're going to rewrite the final scene. If we can't stop the ritual, we can redirect it. Close the gateway instead of opening it fully." The shadow beings screamed without sound. The lights exploded. In the darkness, Mei Rei's voice was steady. "They're afraid. We found a way." When emergency power came on, they saw new symbols burning themselves into the walls. But these were different, older than the others, showing a different ending to the prophecy. "We have until sunrise," Hyunwoo said. "Let's finish this story our way." The church set glowed with an unnatural light as the film crew prepared for their final scene. Do-hyun had positioned cameras in a perfect circle, each one marked with protective symbols that Yoon-hee had found in the archive. Mei-ro walked the perimeter, seeing energy lines connecting each camera like a web of light. "Everything must be precise," Sun-mai said, checking her translated notes one last time. "The ritual works both ways. We can use their own gateway to send them back." The time showed 3:20 a.m. They had 13 minutes until the critical moment. Hanul stood in the center of the camera circle, reviewing their modified script. They had rewritten the ending, combining modern filming techniques with ancient symbols of protection. It was either brilliant or desperate, perhaps both. Taewoo took his position by the altar. Since his possession, he could feel them waiting, pressing against the thinning barrier between worlds. "They're angry," he whispered. "They know what we're trying to do." The shadows in the church began to move, gathering in the corners like storm clouds. The temperature dropped until everyone could see their breath. On every screen, symbols appeared and disappeared, trying to rewrite their new ending. 3 minutes, Jae-won called out, checking his watch. Do-hyun started the cameras rolling. Each one hummed with power, their lenses glowing with that strange inner light. The circle was almost complete. Then everything went wrong. The shadow beings struck all at once. Every light exploded except the camera screens. Dark figures rose from the floor like smoke, surrounding the crew. Through each camera lens, something massive was trying to push through. "Keep filming," Hanul shouted over the chaos. "The circle has to stay complete." Mei Rei saw it first, the gateway starting to open above the altar, a tear in reality itself. Through it came darkness and distant stars that might have been eyes. But something was different. The gateway worked both ways, just as Sun-mai had said. The camera's power grew stronger, their circle of light pushing back against the darkness. Taewoo began speaking the new lines they had written. Ancient words turned from opening to closing. The shadow beings screamed in frequencies that shattered glass. "Now," Hyunwoo commanded. Everyone moved at once. Do-hyun activated all cameras simultaneously. Mei Rei channeled the energy lines through their circle. Sun-mai and Yoon, he read the closing incantations. Hanul directed it all like the final scene it was meant to be. The gateway pulsed, trying to fully open, but their circle held. The shadow beings found themselves caught in the camera's crossfire of light and symbol. What had been their doorway was becoming their prison. "It's working," Ji-won shouted. "Look!" The shadow beings were being pulled back, drawn into the cameras like smoke into a vacuum. Their screams became static, then silence. The gateway above the altar began to close. One by one, the cameras stopped recording. The air became warm again. Natural light returned to the church. In the sudden quiet, They could hear birds beginning to sing outside. Dawn was coming. Hanul checked the camera footage. Each one had recorded the entire event perfectly, not as supernatural horror, but as the final scene of their movie. The shadow beings were visible but contained, transformed into spectacular special effects. "We did it," Hyunwoo said quietly. "We closed their gateway and saved our film." Myrae looked around with her special sight. The energy lines were fading, returning to their natural state. The symbols on the walls became ordinary set decorations. Even her enhanced vision was dimming, the gift fading with the danger. "What do we tell everyone?" Taegu asked. Do-hyun smiled, holding up the memory cards. "The truth. We made an amazing movie. One that will never be remade again." They left the church set as the sun rose, turning shadows back into simple darkness. The cameras were locked away, the footage secured. Their movie would be released, but the real story stayed between them. Years later, some would say that if you watched their version of The Omen at exactly 3:33, you could see something moving in the background, trying to get out. But it never would. They had made sure of that.